History is full of mystery. That rhymed, and now I'll enter a state of self-loathing for the next 5 minutes. Anyway, mysteries are fascinating, so I compiled a list of some of the most interesting mysteries I could. Granted, for this first video, I got some of the more well-known ones. That's primarily to get them out the way so I can save the more niche ones for when there are more eyes on this content. The information for some may be a little shakier than others, so hopefully this will work out to be a fascinating video, even if a touch unoriginal. So please enjoy 7 mysteries from throughout history. Number 1. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. Everybody mentions this particular one in their lists and things. On the one hand, we should be different, but also, it is interesting. In 1959, a group traversed across the northern Urals in Sverdlovsk Oblast, at the time Soviet Union, led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student at the Ural Polytechnical Institute. The group of 10 were all experienced hikers with ski tour experience, embarking on the 28th of January 1959. It didn't take long for one member of the group to turn back due to knee and joint pain that rendered him unable to keep up with the rest of the hikers, leaving 9 to continue. To cut a long, interesting, video in itself story short, the hikers vanished. Dyatlov had failed to telegram their sports club, which he said he would do as soon as the sports club returned to Vizhai, which was expected to happen prior to the 12th of February. On the 20th of February, the hikers' families knew something was wrong and demanded a rescue operation as no messages had been received. First, volunteers went searching, and later the army and police became involved. On the 26th of February, the search bore fruit, discovering the group's now badly damaged tent abandoned in the mountains. The tent was half torn down and covered with snow. All the group's belongings, including some clothing and shoes, had been left behind. Investigators revealed the tent had been cut open from the inside. From the campsite stemmed 9 sets of footprints that could be followed, leading to the edge of a nearby wood on the opposite side of the pass. Here, searchers found the remains of a small fire along with the first 2 bodies, wearing no shoes and only underwear. The branches on a tree in this area were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting it had been climbed. Between this spot and the abandoned camp, 3 more bodies were found, including that of Dyatlov himself. The remaining 4 bodies were finally located on the 4th of May, under 13 feet of snow in a ravine 250 feet further into the woodland from the small fire where the first 2 bodies had been found. On many of the bodies there were no injuries, suggesting they died of hypothermia. However, one had a small crack in his skull, not believed to be a fatal wound. The bodies found in May showed much worse wounds. 1 had major skull damage, and 2 had fatal chest fractures. Investigations suggest the force required to cause these injuries would be on the level with a car crash. However, externally the bodies had minimal to no injuries that would correspond with these fractures. On top of this, there were some particularly peculiar injuries. 1 body was missing her tongue, eyes, lips, along with other facial tissue. Another's eyeballs were missing, and another seemed to have lost his eyebrows. It's believed these occurred post-mortem, but by who, or what, and why? What caused these 9 hikers to cut their tent clean open from the inside out and run into the freezing cold -25 to -30 degrees Celsius snowy outdoors to their deaths? There were no signs of anybody else being present. There weren't even signs of anything else being present. They left the campsite of their own accord, on foot and partially dressed, to just freeze to death or fall into a ravine. Radiation was found on some of the victims' clothing to add an element of spicy to the mix. Theories ranged from some secret Soviet experiment to an avalanche. Foul play was quickly dismissed due to no evidence anybody else was present. Their deaths were chalked down to a compelling natural force and left at that. Next up we have the dancing plague. I touched down on this one in a recent list, however, here's a more expanded version that fits this video. In the year 1518 in Strasbourg, Holy Roman Empire, a dancing plague struck. This weird condition spread up to 400 people and made them dance uncontrollably without resting. It started with one person who began dancing. She was later joined by 34 others, and then before long it numbered in the hundreds. These people danced for days, slowly beginning to die from heart attacks, exhaustion and strokes. Apparently, at one point killing roughly 15 people a day. The dancing would be accompanied at times by howling, laughing, crying, and even obscene gestures and stripping. Doctors at the time couldn't explain what was going on, chalking it down to hot blood, and insisted the afflicted dance it out. Scientists today are still somewhat baffled by this particular event, believing it's possible those affected had some variation of food poisoning or even some mass psychogenic illness. This dancing mania seems like an example of the latter, as many would just begin to dance along with everybody else, compelled to join in with no physical or even environmental causes to the ailment. What's worse is this isn't the only known instance of this particular mania, occurring in mainland Europe, most prominently several times between the 14th and 17th centuries. Even today, mass psychogenic illness is difficult to study due to a lack of opportunities to perform social experiments in this particular subdivision of social sciences. So how this dancing plague came to be will never be known, especially considering cases of this dancing plague have since stopped. Moving on, next up is the WOW signal. On the 15th of August 1977, at the Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope, located in Delaware, whilst being used in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, picked up a signal that seemed to have come from the Sagittarius constellation. The signal sequence lasted 72 seconds and was only discovered a few days after, whilst astronomer Jerry R. Eman was reviewing the recording. His computer printout of the signal's intensity read 6EQUJ5. Contrary to what some believe, this isn't a message. Eman circled this and wrote "WOW" in red ink next to it. Interestingly, the Big Ear Radio Telescope relied on the rotation of the Earth to scan space, therefore it can only observe any given point for 72 seconds and no longer, the exact length of the signal. This would suggest the possibility of a continuous extraterrestrial signal which would be expected to register for this length of time, gradually increasing in intensity for 36 seconds, peaking, and then declining for 36 seconds, which is exactly what happened with the WOW signal. Several attempts were later made to find the signal again, but to cut a long story short, recurrences were never found. It's uncertain what caused this anomaly. Some claim a man-made source to be the culprit. Others, obviously, will immediately jump to aliens. Unfortunately, no explanation covers all bases. To this day, the WOW signal is referred to as the single strongest candidate for alien contact ever detected. However, whether or not that's what it was is anybody's guess. Anyway, off the back of that, a quick question I wanted to ask was, do you believe in aliens? Let us know in the comments. Next up, we have the lost colony of Roanoke. In the 16th century, Sir Walter Raleigh set his sights on North America, his goal, founding the first permanent English settlement on the continent. In 1587, after having departed from Plymouth in 1585, Raleigh, whilst never visiting North America himself, sent a fleet of settlers which landed on Roanoke Island, North Carolina, establishing a small colony governed by a man named John White. The first year was difficult. Supplies were lacking, and with limited knowledge of the land and no steady income streams, not that it would have made much difference to an at least economically isolated colony, without assistance the colony was doomed, and a trip had to be made back to England to fetch supplies. John White supposedly embarked on this voyage back to England in late 1587, but when those who went to retrieve supplies returned 3 years later in 1590, they discovered their newly formed settlement to be a ghost town. The inhabitants had gone missing. Among the missing included John White's daughter and granddaughter, the first English child born in North America. The colonists left their settlement fortified, but also left minimal clues behind, aside from a mysterious message carved into the trees: Croatoan, or simply Crow at times. It's believed this meant the colonists had moved to Croatoan Island, now known as Hatteras Island, a short distance south of Roanoke, and popular theories claim these colonists joined a group of Native Americans in order to overcome their lack of resources. Sadly, this lead could not be pursued at the time, and the rescue mission had to return to England. Archaeological evidence found thanks to the Croatoan project discovered artifacts only English settlers would have owned on Croatoan Island that implied the Roanoke settlers had at least interacted with the Hatteras tribe. Despite this, however, no definitive answers to the mystery had been discovered. All that's known for certain is the Roanoke colony vanished, and the cryptic message Croatoan certainly added an element of creepiness to the mystery. After the failure of the Roanoke colony, the first successful permanent English colony in North America was Jamestown in 1607, followed by Plymouth in 1620. Number 5. The Green Children of Woolpit. In 12th century England, 2 children supposedly showed up in the village of Woolpit. They were said to have been brother and sister. Most notably, they had green skin, wore strange clothing, and didn't speak a word of English. They ate nothing but uncooked beans at first. Over time, they began to eat more of a variety and would supposedly lose their green skin. To this day, it's unclear if this story even recounts actual events at all, and if it does, are the accounts reliable? It's possible this is a garbled retelling of a less remarkable story, but it's also possible that this particular one is folklore. Over the years, rational possible explanations and interpretations of this story have been offered, ranging from a story about racial differences to an interpretation of sick children who didn't speak much and didn't know their way home. Others have dismissed it as a hoax. Oddly enough, explanations for this are still sought. Next up, we have the big boy, the mystery of D.B. Cooper. Now, this one is pretty cool, all in all, but mysterious, just the same. In the afternoon of the 24th of November 1971, a man under the name Dan Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727 aircraft flying from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. Once aboard the plane, the man handed a flight attendant a note stating that he had a bomb in his briefcase and wanted her to sit next to him. Upon doing so, Dan Cooper detailed his demands. He wanted $200,000, worth roughly $1.3 million in today's spending power, in $20 bills, and 4 parachutes. Upon landing, authorities had no choice but to meet his demands. After the plane took back off, Cooper parachuted out of the back in the dead of night in rainy conditions over southwestern Washington, falling to an unclear fate. To pull off a stunt like that, it's believed he would have needed a great deal of training and experience in parachuting, leading many to believe he was an Air Force veteran, but others believe if he had said training, he never would have attempted the stunt at all. It's also likely Cooper was knowledgeable about aircraft and local terrain, and also extensively planned the heist, demanding 4 parachutes to instill fears he'd take a hostage on the jump with him, preventing the authorities from giving him a deliberately faulty chute. The true identity of the man, which clearly wasn't actually Dan Cooper, is unknown, and it's unclear whether or not he survived the heist. However, some of the ransom money was later discovered along the banks of the Columbia River in 1980, 9 years after the hijacking. Due to the media miscommunication, the mystery became known as D.B. Cooper. The crime remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history, and numerous theories have been proposed over the years. The FBI maintained an investigation for 45 years after the hijacking. No body was ever found, though the search area where the hijacker would have landed was vast and mainly forested. In 2016, after reviewing over 1,000 suspects in total, the FBI suspended their active investigation into the case in order to reallocate resources for other, more pressing and present issues. 50 years on, the case of the Dan Cooper hijacking still captivates people. A man who hijacked a plane, extorted $200,000 in cash and parachuted into the night without hurting anybody in the process has made him a bit of a legend to many. A fascinating story, and new theories arise all the time, from people claiming a relative or friend to have been the infamous hijacker to people confessing to the crime on their deathbeds. I mean, come on guys, you can't all be the same man. And finally, the seventh mystery for today's video is another big notorious boy, and that is Jack the Ripper. The identity of the serial killer known as Jack the Ripper, or Jack Leather Apron, who operated in Whitechapel, London in the autumn of 1888, is a huge mystery. The most famous or infamous, if we're being realistic, unsolved serial killer case of all time. Jack the Ripper killed at least 5 women in his autumn of terror, stalking the streets of London at night. The canonical 5 victims were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, the bodies of which were brutally mutilated, sliced up with knives, and some had organs missing or removed. It's believed the killer had a surgical understanding of human anatomy. One body was believed to have been found only moments after the murder had occurred, with it being believed that when the steward of the International Working Man's Education Society discovered the body of Elizabeth Stride, the killer was somewhere still at the scene. The Ripper supposedly sent letters to the press and police taunting their inability to catch him, though some are more reliable than others. However, this is why the killings are so well known. Over the years, Jack the Ripper, despite not being the first serial killer ever, became the most well known, and of course, the culprit behind it, assuming it was just one man, has never been discovered. That being said, the case didn't lack for suspects, and in the 134 years that have passed since, there's been no shortage of theories. Again, some fit more than others. This reminds me of the time where I met a bloke who claimed one of his great-grandfathers was the Ripper, on account of the fact that he liked knives. I don't think a personal fascination with knives is hereditary, so that's just a weird interaction to be honest, but fair play mate. Besides the canonical 5, it's believed to be possible that the Ripper murdered more women. However, outside those 5, none have been confirmed. The official number of Ripper victims is listed as unknown, with similar killings occurring in the years both before and after the Autumn of Terror. And that brings us nicely to the end of today's list. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. That would be awesome. And don't forget to whack notifications on so we can basically shower you aggressively with history content. Anyway, with any luck, we'll be seeing you all very soon with another video. But until next time, take care and goodbye.